What's going on, guys? My name is Sean Barnard, and welcome to the Sixers Digest YouTube channel. I'm back after a somewhat busy weekend in the NBA world. Despite it being the dead of the NBA calendar, there are still some things in the work with the rumors, with the trades, and most notably, the statement made by the NBA sending a memo to all 30 teams about the recent activity of Dame Lillard and his agent and their attempts to drive him to Miami via trade. I'm here to break that down and how that impacts James Harden right here in Philadelphia, who's looking at somewhat of a similar situation. So to get right into it, I first want to break down the situation with Dame Lillard and talk about what this means for James Harden. So the initial report that was released, according to ESPN, the NBA sent a league-wide memo on Friday stating that players could face discipline if they make public or private comments indicating that they won't, quote, fully perform the services called for under his player contract in the event of the trade. So this is, of course, directly referring to Dame Lillard, who there's been reports just about on a daily basis about his feelings, his desire to go to Miami, and why this is such an issue. Now, we know that Dame Lillard is under contract, and before I get fully into those details, I want to point out a specific part of this blurb that was released, and this is via The Athletic through Shams Charania, and what it says here is, quote, "We interviewed Goodwin and Lillard and also spoke with several NBA teams to whom Goodwin spoke. Goodwin denied stating or indicating to any team that Lillard would refuse to play for them. Goodwin and Lillard affirmed to us that Lillard would fully perform the services called for under his player contract in any trade situation. The relevant teams provided descriptions of their communications with Goodwin that were mostly, though not entirely, consistent with Goodwin's statements to us. We've advised Goodwin and Lillard that any future comments made privately to teams or publicly suggesting Lillard will not fully perform the services called for under his player contract in the event of trade will subject Lillard to discipline by the NBA. We have also advised the Players Association that any similar comments by players or their agents will be subject to discipline going forward." This is a pretty significant statement by the NBA. We have seen the tides turn throughout the recent years of this star empowerment and superstars really demanding where they can go. And honestly, it works for them. We've seen it with Kyrie Irving. We've seen it with Kevin Durant. We've seen it with James Harden. In general, when the stars want to go to a destination, it happens. And I get it. There is a give and take with this. And for starters, the root of this issue is the NBA has brought in these contract kickers and these rewards. We just saw Jaylen Brown ink the richest deal in NBA history. That is not because Jaylen Brown is the best basketball player. It was his time to get paid, and because he's with the franchise that drafted him, that comes with much more incentive. So there's a little bit of a situation of these star players trying to get their cake and eat it too by signing that lucrative long-term deal, staying with the franchise, and then demanding a trade. We just saw it with Bradley Beal, who forced his way successfully to the Suns after signing that long-term contract, one that was perceived as an untradeable contract, one of the worst contracts in sports just because of the face value of it. But it did ultimately work out for him. We're seeing a somewhat similar situation with Dame Lillard. I think Dame Lillard is a more highly regarded asset than Bradley Beal, even at this stage in both of their careers. And there's also a loyalty factor that keeps being brought up from. Before I compare it to James Harden, I do want to bring up that they are very different situations in the way that Dame Lillard and Portland have quite the strong relationship. He is, if not the one of the best players to ever wear a Portland Trailblazers uniform. He has poured his heart and soul into that franchise. He has put them on the map, and he has stuck it through the mud for far longer than most stars would. That is not quite the case with James Harden. We've seen James Harden successfully force his hand to the Brooklyn Nets and then to the Philadelphia 76ers. And here he is trying to force his way from the Sixers to the Clippers. So to break it down, the first report with James Harden, which kind of indicates similar things. They're not as specific, and I do want to compare them here. So I'll start out with the Dame report. And we have when Dame reported here initially that the Trailblazers star Dame Lillard has requested a trade out of Portland, sources tell, and directly after Shams quote tweeting his own tweet saying, "The Portland Trailblazers have been informed that Damian Lillard wants a trade specifically to the Eastern Conference champion Miami Heat." Multiple sources tell The Athletic. That is the root of the issue, is the handpicking where he wants to go, especially because the Heat are not the team that is flourishing with assets. They're not this team that just has guys that they can farm off and sell. They have limitations. This is a team that went to the finals last year for a reason, and we saw a good portion of their talent being these undrafted guys. That is where they make their money, in those margins, in between. They don't really have this lucrative pile of assets that would fairly equate to a trade for Dame Lillard, which is very much the holdup in this situation. I do think the Trailblazers would like to do right by Dame and trade him to where he wants to go with the Heat, but you can't do that at the own deficit of your franchise. You can't put yourself in a bad spot. Now, to James Harden, a little bit more of a open-ended request here. Here was the initial report from James Harden here, and it said, James Harden is opting into his $35.6 million deal next season in order for the 10-time All-Star and the 76ers to work together on a trade out of Philadelphia. So this was different, But immediately after this was reported, it was various reports coming around that the Clippers were his circle destination. That's where he wants to go. Now, what does make this situation different is, number one, this was a player option that Harden was opting into. And there is weight to why the Sixers would be okay with this. In another world, James Harden can walk in free agency, sign wherever he wants, and the Sixers get nothing in return. At least in this situation, the Sixers are getting some form of player back or some sort of return in a trade. But this also puts them at the deficit. We saw a couple years ago when Jimmy Butler did a similar thing when he wanted to go to Miami. The Sixers walk away with Josh Richardson. And sure, it's great that they got something rather than leaving for free, but you don't feel great about watching a star walk out and getting just not fair value, face value on return. And that's the situation Daryl Morey finds himself in. So as far as Harden specifically, immediately the Clippers were labeled as a potential target. One of the few teams around the NBA that still makes sense for James Harden, if we're being completely honest. And even as recently as a week ago, we get a report from Jake Fisher saying that James Harden's side has believed that joining the Clippers is not a matter of if, but when. It should be noted that report did come out before this memo. There hasn't been anything that firm since then, but that is the situation that we find. And Fisher went deeper in that report to talk about how James Harden expects to arrive at training camp, that he will be there, and that he can put more pressure on the organization by being in the building and maybe not doing his thing, performing up to his standard, or playing basketball at a high level. That's kind of the James Harden that we're being braced for from the Sixers' perspective. Those are the various leaks that are coming out. We see him eating burgers at the wedding. Who knows what kind of weight he comes in shape at camp. All of the above. These are all fair concerns. But as I mentioned in the last video, which you absolutely should check out on the channel as well, I don't think James Harden can afford to do that anymore, because we are all still seeing, as much as I get it, he wants to go to the Clippers. This is the clearest route to do it, would be opting into the Sixers and the Sixers trading him to the Clippers. That is the best case scenario, because the Clippers did not have room under the salary cap to offer him a legitimate contract. The most the Clippers could offer for James Harden in straight up free agency would be just over $3 million, which is a far cry from the 35 that he did opt into. So I understand that. But to that same point, the Sixers cannot just be taking a bath on this trade, that they only have limited opportunities to get things right around Joel Embiid. And to be honest, this package of role players that they're seeing assemble, them not even be willing to include guys like Terrence Mann, there's just no way that the Sixers can be willing to get a deal done through that. Now let's look at what Harden did last year. His stats, very impressive. Despite the perception of him being pretty negative, let's look. 21 points per game, 6.1 rebounds, 10.7 assists. That 38.5% from three is the second highest of his career, something he had not done in over a decade. James Harden was very good last year, and that is what complicates this further, is they cannot afford to just give him away. And from the same breath, the Sixers are even shorter on assets than most teams around the league, even more so than the Heat. The Heat at least can package some first-round picks, make a legitimate offer, take this upside swing at Heat. There's going to be something materialized, and even through all this determined through the media and all these reports, and there is some out-of-line stuff going on when we talk about threatening to not even suit up for another team if he's trading here. That's a big part of the issue, and where the NBA is stepping their foot down. I don't think we're facing that type of hard situation with James Harden, but it's still the point of, you are now under contract by these Sixers. These Sixers are in their right to do what is best for the franchise. Daryl Morey is in that spot that he needs to get this trade right for the Sixers to have a chance to win a championship in the Joel Embiid era. So I don't know what happens from here. Maybe this is a shot at James Harden, that he doesn't have the power in this situation. He absolutely is not taking as much of heat as Dame Lillard, and Dame Lillard is taking things several steps further than James Harden. But to that same breath, he has a little bit more leash to work with because of his rapport with the franchise and the things that he has done. These Sixers do not owe James Harden anything. And frankly, if they want to force him to show up and play, if that's the dice that they want to roll to see if even James Harden, maybe at 50% effort, is better than what they're getting back in the trade, they might find that out. But that also might not necessarily be the case, that maybe James Harden is willing to take things to the extent. And I do think that this is going to be an ongoing issue. I don't think this was a one memo sent and this is a case closed. I think the NBA is going to continue monitoring how stars are driving forces. And don't get me wrong, player empowerment is an awesome thing. We've seen the tides turn a ton in recent years, whether it be the Players Association growing, having guys like CJ McCollum running the lead. But there still has to be a point where this is a functioning business aspect for everyone involved. We now see how the system is a little bit unraveling by this way of players tapping into these rewards for sticking to the original team, only to then force that team's hand and put them in an even worse spot. So I'm surprised there wasn't more done in the CBA that was just signed this year and will go into effect next year to specifically address that, especially in the wake of the Ben Simmons situation, which stirred this pot more than anyone in this whole entire conversation, and frankly changed the game as far as the levels that athletes were willing to go for this spot. That was the first time that we had seen that for a player of star caliber, which at that point Ben Simmons still was, to force his hand with that much time left on his contract. And it did eventually work out for him. I get it. Like, we had the whole ugly stare down, hold off situation, wasted a year of the Sixers basically, where Joel Embiid was just going out, putting up these MVP numbers without a true co-star next to him. We did get to see the growth of Tyrese Maxey over that stretch, so there were advantages to it, and James Harden did eventually come, but there just was not enough time for it to click into a cohesive roster, especially without the opportunity to get other players around them. The guys, the role players that were needed and added in the last offseason, and hopefully more coming on the way when this trade is completed. The bottom line is, this isn't good for the NBA by any standards. That these guys trying to force their hands, NBA teams fighting it, or NBA teams taking a bath on the trade value, it doesn't work well for anyone. So I do expect that there to be some major adjustments to this. I'm curious how much James Harden gets pulled into the mix, how much there is news brought up on this. And it should be a sign that Harden and Dame Lillard and the rest of the stars forcing their hands in these need to tread a little lighter, because that is what needs to happen for everything to work. So we will see how things play out from here. I'm happy to see the NBA stepping up, but we are still heading down a dangerous path that needs to be corrected. So that's all I got for now. Appreciate all you guys for tuning in. Make sure to drop a subscribe on this channel. Drop a couple comments. Let me know what you think. Drop a like on this video, and I will talk next time. Peace.